Imagine it's the year 2000. You're browsing conspiracy websites online when someone begins claiming he's a time traveler from the year 2036. He warned that a civil war would erupt in America, followed by global nuclear conflict and the collapse of society. But the strangest part of his story wasn't the war, and it wasn't even the time machine. It was the computer he said he needed to save the future. A machine from the 1970s that had a secret ability that nobody had heard of. And more than 20 years later, nobody has ever proven who he really was. On November the 2nd, 2000, someone under the name timetravel_0 began posting messages on the Time Travel Intuit forum. He described how time machines worked, technical explanations about gravity distortion, world-line divergence, and the mechanics of traveling between times. A few months later, the same individual began posting on another well-known internet forum, the Art Bell Post-to-Post message board. This was linked to the popular radio show Coast to Coast AM. It was famous for discussing topics such as UFOs, conspiracies, ghosts. You get the idea. It was on this forum that the person began using the name John Titor. He claimed to be a US soldier from the year 2036, sent back in time on a mission. According to his story, he was assigned to travel to 1975 to retrieve a special machine while he was passing through the year 2000. He said he decided to stop and answer questions online, hoping to bring some awareness. At first, the internet treated the posts like any other conspiracy story, but something unusual began to happen. People started asking increasingly technical questions about physics, time travel theory, and the machine itself. And surprisingly, he always had an answer.
I was sent to 1975 to get a computer system and take it back to 2036. Time travel is not a secret in 2036, and I expect it to become more common. In 2036, I live in Central Florida with my family, and I'm currently stationed at an Army base in Tampa. A world war in 2015 killed nearly 3 billion people. I would guess the temporal divergence between this world line and my original is about 1 or 2%.
And what I find most fascinating about all this is the time machine he used to get here, strapped to a classic Corvette from the 1960s. Before we discuss what John Titor meant by temporal divergence, let's first get an understanding of the time machine he was using. Titor described a C204 gravity distortion time displacement unit. I know, it's a bit of a mouthful. He claimed it was installed in a 1967 Chevrolet Corvette and supposedly used dual microsingularities, gravitational distortion, and something known as Kerr black hole physics. Now, just for simplicity, dual microsingularities are tiny artificial black holes suspended inside the time machine, supposedly. And what he refers to as the Kerr black hole is simply the rotation of the black holes, stabilizing the time displacement. What surprised many people was the level of technical detail, diagrams and schematics of the time displacement unit, one that you would just find from a real engineering design. Titor claimed that the time machine had an official manual, and he even posted pages and photographs of it. You can see the detailed schematics of the machine, labeled diagrams of its internal components, and even photographs to show the device mounted inside the vehicle.
My time machine is a stationary mass temporal displacement unit manufactured by General Electric. The unit is powered by 2 top-spin dual positive singularities that produce a standard offset Tipler sinusoid. In a sense, you do dial in a date, and the computer system controls the distortion field. At maximum power, the unit I have is capable of traveling about 10 years an hour.
Whether accurate or not, the combination of technical language, detailed charts, and logical explanation seemed grounded in real science. Titor also claimed that his time machine had limits. This is where the idea of temporal divergence, also called world-line divergence, comes into play. He said the machine could only travel accurately about 60 years through time. Going much further than that would cause too much divergence between timelines. In other words, the further he travelled, the more different the destination world line would become, until eventually it might resemble a completely different reality.
The C204 begins to break away at about 60 years. This means the level of confidence drops rapidly after 60 years of travel, and the world line divergence increases. In other words, if I wanted to go back 2,000 years and meet Christ, there is a better than average chance I would end up on a world line where he was never born.
This is the reason John Titor gave for why predictions may or may not come true. It doesn't mean they didn't happen. They just didn't happen on our timeline.
Hello, I'm Barbara Chapney from Minolta, and the answer for your business might be the Minolta Fax 361. Minolta designed it with performance in mind, so it has all the features you've been looking for. The Minolta Fax 361 is one fax that will be very...
John Titor made extraordinary predictions about the future. He claimed a US Civil War starting around 2004 to 2008, World War III around 2015, and Russia launching nuclear strikes. He did make smaller predictions which were oddly accurate. He predicted that fax machines would eventually fade out, and he hinted at advances in particle physics that we now know come to fruition, like the experiments at CERN. Although the events on the specific dates never happened, many of the events he described, global political tensions, regional conflicts, and the looming threat of a large-scale war, are strikingly similar to what we see today. A user on the Time Travel Intuit forum under the name Pamela was asking John Titor multiple questions, such as what it feels like to time travel, what are some of your memories of 2036, and are you able to even control where you go? Very little is known about Pamela, but the most intriguing question she asked was, what would happen if you would meet yourself on another world line? Now, this is interesting because it's one of the unanswered questions in time travel theory today. In simple terms, it asks what would happen if someone traveled back in time and accidentally prevented their own grandfather from meeting their grandmother. If that happened, the time traveler would never been born. Surprisingly, John Titor had an answer.
It has always surprised me why that concept is so hard for people to imagine and accept. Nothing would happen. The universe would not end, and there are no paradox problems that threaten existence. Temporal space-time is made up of every possible quantum state. The Everett-Wheeler model is correct. I have met and/or seen myself twice on different world lines. I was born in 1998, so the other me is 2 on this world line. There is a saying where I come from. Every possible thing that can happen or will happen has already happened somewhere.
The Everett-Wheeler model was proposed by physicist Hugh Everett III in 1957, and then later expanded and supported by John Archibald Wheeler. Better known today as the many worlds interpretation, it suggests that reality doesn't follow just one single timeline. It does not accept that the past is the past, and it can never be accessed. Instead, every possible outcome of an event creates a new branch of reality. Here's an analogy. Imagine flipping a coin. In one universe, it lands heads, and then in the other, it lands tails. According to this model, both outcomes happen, but in separate timelines. But the strangest part of the entire story wasn't the war or the time machine. It was the reason he came here in the first place. Let's get to the why of everything. According to Titor, his entire mission revolved around a single computer, an old 1970s machine called the IBM 5100. This is where things get really weird. Titor claimed the IBM 5100 had a secret feature. It could emulate older IBM systems used to debug legacy code. It was able to translate between older IBM code such as APL, BASIC, and even Unix. Now, I won't get into the technicals of this, but at the time, this capability was only known by a few IBM engineers. Knowledge, he said, would remain unknown until decades later. So the question is, how did John Titor know this? What made this claim intriguing was that the IBM 5100 did include real emulation, just like he said. And this fact wasn't even part of the marketing materials of the IBM 5100. In fact, the secret was officially confirmed in 2004 by one of the original creators, Bob Duke.
I was sent back to 1975 to get a computer. It's an IBM model 5100. My grandfather worked on it. We need it in 2036 to recode Unix, which dies in 2038. The 5100 is able to read old IBM mainframe code. It's the first portable computer produced by IBM. Actually, it's the size of a small table.
It may not sound impressive today, but in the 1970s, computers weren't sitting on desks. They filled entire rooms. Unix, which supposedly dies in 2038, is simply the operating system that ran on the computers back then and still used today. And the reason why he needed this? Because a multi-year war had broken out in his timeline, and by 2036, the major fighting was over. The world was rebuilding from nuclear strikes and societal collapse. Computers and legacy technology were crucial for recovery, which explains why the IBM 5100 was so important.
There is a civil war in the United States that starts in 2005. That conflict flares up and down for 10 years. In 2015, Russia launches a nuclear strike against the major cities in the United States, China, and Europe. The United States counterattacks. The US cities are destroyed along with the American Federal Empire.
Remember when John Titor said, "We need it in 2036 to recode Unix, which dies in 2038? Well, this is an actual real issue in computer science today. Now, I'll try my best to not sound so technical, but just bear with me. Many older Unix systems store time as a 32-bit number, counting the seconds since January the 1st, 1970. But the number eventually runs out on January the 19th, 2038. Those systems will reset their clocks back to the year 1901, potentially breaking software that depend on accurate dates. So when Titor mentioned this failing in 2038, it sounded absolutely plausible to programmers, and today we know it's a real factual problem. Then, in March 2001, John Titor posted what would be his final message to the world.
In about 30 days, I will be leaving this world line to return home to 2036. I first want to say thank you for the wonderful conversation and insight into your society. I have learned a great deal, and my opinion on quite a few things has changed dramatically.
After some years of his disappearance, there were multiple investigations documented from 2008 and 2009, and here is what they found. There were no public records of any real person named John Titor. However, in 2003, a company called John Titor Foundation was created, and they published a book called A Time Traveler's Tale. Some investigators believe the entire story may have been an elaborate hoax to promote the book, but never proven. They also found the IP address linked to the posts, which originated back to Florida. They also linked the story to a Florida lawyer called Larry Haber and possibly his brother, John Rick Haber. Larry acted as a representative for the John Titor Foundation, and his brother John, who had technical knowledge, might explain the detailed technical references. They both completely denied creating the character, and nothing has ever been proven. So, what should we make of this story? Today, mainstream physics accept time travel as a complete possibility. We know that time travel is experienced differently the closer you are to Earth. There has been speculation at CERN, the Hadron Collider in Switzerland. Some say they could be using black budget funding to create a time machine. Maybe they have already created this, maybe not. If you want me to dive deeper into this, let me know down below. But we have to accept that the concept of time travel alone is not far-fetched, and it is only a matter of time until it is widely understood and openly told to society. The most important thing is not to be closed-minded, but to remain curious and open to the possibilities we don't yet fully understand. And as for John Titor, more than 25 years later, the mystery remains unsolved. John Titor never tried to prove who he was, not once. He simply told his story, answered questions with great detail, and then disappeared. And so, by the off chance the story is true, then let's hope one part of his predictions never reaches our timeline. The catastrophic world war he claimed was coming.
.6, 1.8% worldwide divergence. I need help.